Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hi, welcome to Parrot TV's Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering, your noble host. Today we have Casey Dorman, who is a former university professor and dean, a psychologist, a literary review editor, an essayist, and the author of 13 novels, a collection of short stories and poems, and 3 nonfiction books, including a volume in the Johns Hopkins series on neuroscience and psychiatry. He has published academic and research articles in psychology, medical, public health, and philosophy journals. He is a member of the Society of Philosophers in America. Casey's novels borrow heavily from his clinical and research background and his interest in cognitive neuroscience, and span genres from mystery and science fiction to literary works. His science fiction tries to reflect recent hard science and raise philosophical and social issues at the same time. His most recent novel, Ezekiel's Brain, is a sci-fi novel on the cutting edge of research in neuroscience and artificial intelligence, and addresses issues of ethics and ecology. Casey lives in California near the ocean and enjoys gardening, hiking, reading, and wine tasting with his wife. Thank you for joining us today, Casey. I hope you're doing well. I hope all
Thank
the
you,
weather's
Dustin.
good in California.
It is. It is. We missed out on the heat wave that a lot of the West Coast and mountain states had, and so it's beautiful in the 70s as usual here.
Excellent. So, getting to the the sort of the heart of your work, I think, as a philosopher, what is your stance on consciousness?
First of all, I'm a materialist, so that I do think that consciousness is something that is a product of the brain that can be explained in terms of the way the brain works, that it's couched in linguistic terms, and what I've been working on lately is trying to figure out how, given all those things, I do think that a machine could be conscious, and so I'm trying to figure out how that would work.
Interesting.
What are the necessary components of cognition to produce consciousness?
So, do you have would you describe yourself as sort of a hard determinist or a soft determinist?
I guess it would be a soft determinist in the sense that everything follows natural laws, but we do consciousness. We can direct our own actions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think it's an illusion that we're directing our own actions, in the sense that we're unaware of the forces in the environment that make it almost mandatory that we act the way we do.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we do have some power to change that.
I think so too. I think that it's impossible to really say you're fully free or you're fully determined. There's a little bit of a mix between the two, and whether you're somebody of your, like yourself, as a materialist, or if you're a religious person, I think it's healthy to adopt some sort of stance on free will, to have a fair amount of idea that you do have certain amount of control. You may not be able to determine your thoughts per se, but you can determine how you react to them, or how you operate within that context, I think.
Yeah, I do think that planning is something that we do consciously, and our behavior follows the plans that we make. Devising strategies is something that we do consciously, and our behavior follows. Decision making, unless we put it down on paper or weigh the odds or something like that, then it's less clear that we usually know why we're making the decisions that we do. But not always.
Right. I think so. That's entirely possible. So, what subjects do your nonfiction books discuss?
The one that you had mentioned, the very first book that I ever wrote, and I jokingly say it's the reason that I decided to write fiction. It's a book. I've got it right here, called Cognitive Effects of Early Brain Injury. Hardcover book published in 1994 by Johns Hopkins University Press, and it has approximately 800 references and took me 6 years to write. It's a summary of the kinds of things that happen from genetic causes and birth injury and the effects in academic learning primarily that result from that. And it took so long and so much work that I decided, as I say, I jokingly, as I decided from then on, everything I wrote, I'm going to make up. And so I've been doing that, but I did write two other nonfiction books. And one is the book, Is God Really Necessary? And that was the subtitle is A Glimpse into the Mind of an Atheist. And it's kind of my story, how I became an atheist, and why I consider it, how I justify being an atheist. And the second one, which is a similar theme, it's called Atheistic Nonviolence. And that stemmed from, these are both thin books, that stemmed from a group that I belonged to briefly, which was a group that was strongly pacifistic and engaged in active nonviolence in the sense of protests and things like that. And we were talking about developing a long-term philosophy for what we were doing, and they were strongly emphasizing their spiritual reasons for being atheistic and or being a nonviolent. And I said, I didn't want that to be written into the sort of bylaws of our group because I didn't consider myself spiritualistic and materialistic. And they said, well, you are spiritualistic, because if you weren't spiritualistic, you wouldn't be nonviolent. You wouldn't agree with this on all the other values we have. So I had thought, well, that's wrong. But rather than getting in a big argument, I'm going to write a little book about how you don't need to have a religious or spirit. Many of them don't consider themselves religious, but spiritual. And that from a strictly materialistic point of view, you can still be nonviolent as a philosophy of life. Just because you think it, you don't want to hurt other people, and you don't want to live by a philosophy that justifies it in some way.
Right. And I think just from the stance of empathy and social organization, that alone, I mean, that could definitely stand for a good, solid structure for a nonviolent action and protest. You don't want to upset the balance and harmony of society too much, and nonviolence, I mean, as we see in, leaders like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, he's a fantastic example of nonviolence being very effective and memorable. People remember him as a great figure because he was so effective as a leader, and I'm sure there's probably examples also of atheistic or non-spiritual, people who were also nonviolent, who are active in social movements. Plenty of examples of nonviolent atheists. I mean, it's all throughout history as well.
Right.
So coming from that to us, from the humanist standpoint about you have an essay called Humanizing Monsters. And I was curious, what benefit do you think socially can be derived from what you would call humanizing monsters, or seeing evil as human rather than as something otherworldly or supernatural?
I think that when we and I wrote that essay in response to listening to an NPR program where they were interviewing someone who'd spent time with um, the ISIS,
Okay.
and they talked about sitting around in the evening and they listening to them quote poetry, which was part of their Arabic and sometimes Persian backgrounds, was to use poetry as a way of conveying things to each other. And some songs, although they weren't romantic songs, they were kind of put to music or chanting as a way. And
Mhm.
his interviewer interrupted him and said, "Aren't by focusing on this human aspect, aren't you afraid of humanizing the terrorists?" And I thought, how can you be afraid of humanizing a human being?
Yeah.
To me, that of course they're humans, and
Mhm.
so I wanted to talk about what people do that we consider monstrous is some of it's just a different point of view, but even if it is qualifies as monstrous according to our value system, they are people who are doing this, and they're doing it for their own reasons. And the only way that we can eventually learn to get along with them is to see them as people, not see them as outside the realm of reason or outside the realm of decency or those kinds of things. So that's
Right.
really what I was getting at.
What an interesting essay. I definitely suggest our readers look for that. Where can they find that?
It's in a published in a journal by a group called the Society of Philosophers in America, SOFIA,
Mhm.
and it's called Civic American. Um, it was interesting. It also can be found if now I haven't looked lately. I assume he's still alive. Philip Zimbardo, who I quote in there, who was a famous psychologist,
Mhm.
famous for doing the Stanford prison experiments. Um, Wrote me. He somehow had gotten hold of the essay and wrote me and loved my essay so much that he put it on his list of readings on his
Oh,
website. His website isn't just Philip Bar. It's he's got a funny name and I can't remember what it is to the website. It's some group that he's formed.
mhm.
Um, because basically that was his message, which is that even I think the Stanford prison experiments showed it that ordinary human beings can act like monsters given the situation that they're in. We're highly persuadable,
Right.
and can sometimes act in ways that we even contrast with our own value systems, because we've been
Absolutely.
persuaded.
We see that. I mean, there's so many examples of that. I mean, the Nazis and Holocaust, just that's the immediate,
Yeah.
go to. Yeah, it's definitely some. I try to tell people that myself. There's a old saying about it. If you, I think Jordan Peterson's really fond of saying this as well, is that if you think you wouldn't be persuaded by Hitler during that period in that particular circumstance, then you think you're so heroic that you would fight it. You're probably delusional. I mean, most likely you have to recognize that it's in everybody. That capacity is within all of us, to be persuaded by these. I don't know what you would call them. I mean, obviously they're human beings, but charismatic figures, or
Demographic.
however you would look at them, demigods. Yeah, there. That's the perfect word for it. Absolutely. So how would you explore that theme in literature? How do you think that could be kind of interwoven into a good science fiction novel, or maybe even just like a novel in general?
That's a very good question. That it would it's a well, I'll give you one example that is at least related to that, which is that I've been I'm writing a sequel to my novel Ezekiel's Brain. Now, most of the characters in the sequel, in fact, almost all the characters are going to be artificial intelligence and androids, so computerized people, so to speak,
Mhm.
and logical and so forth. And what happens in the plot of that is that while the main crew of AIs, the heroes of the story, are away from planet Earth, Earth goes through a meteor shower, which is highly destructive to parts of Earth, and not other parts, and through something called I think B.F. Skinner called it ritualistic behavior, the kind of thing that causes gamblers. You're very luckily people did certain things. They were lucky, and the meteors didn't hit. They did it again, and just by they get reinforced. Right. So the androids that are left behind create a religion based on this lucky behavior of warding off absolutely random meteors hitting Earth. And that religion, in fact, then creates leaders of that religion who then, in order to, then their biggest fear is that people won't keep joining their religion. And so they start to, I'm trying to think of the word is, but turn into monsters, those people who don't agree with them. And right. So pretty soon you've got exactly sort of the very human set of behaviors and happening in artificial intelligence that just through that's the way things work, that you ward off danger by accident. You start to believe, you become like a baseball player and do all this kind of stuff before you go up to bat. And pretty soon you invent a theology to explain the behaviors, which you don't even really know why you're doing. And the theology becomes a culture of its own that has the in-group and the out-group, and you have to demonize the out-group. And that's how it all gets going.
Interesting. So that's definitely a very human thing, and it would be interesting to see how these AI androids kind of play that out.
Yeah,
so we're looking forward to your next book. So why don't you read us a little bit of your from your work?
Yeah, I'll read at least parts of the first chapter of Ezekiel.
Okay,
that's my latest book, and it came out in mid-April of this year, published by New Link Publishers, which is a small, dedicated to science fiction publisher in Nevada, part of a somewhat larger group called Mystic Publishing. And again, I wanted to explore some of the issues, mostly of consciousness and artificial intelligence. But the thing that started me to write this book was a book called Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, who's a British, I think Oxford or Cambridge sort of philosopher, computer guy. And it was frightening enough that I decided to write a book about AI going out of control. And then I got so invested in liking my AI, my artificial intelligence, that the last half of the book is now they're the only ones and they're doing all the things we always wished humans did. Here we go. The first chapter. Hello, is anyone there? The booming voice from the speaker bounced from one wall to another in the cramped room, causing Professor Ezekiel Job to lurch backward in his chair as if he'd been struck. Despite its volume, he recognized the voice as his, but it wasn't him speaking. He lowered the volume and stared at the speaker, his angular 6-foot frame hunched over the small metal microphone, which stood in the middle of the rectangular steel lab desk. He had to remind himself to exhale. His intense dark eyes swept over the racks of massively parallel superscalar multiprocessors standing against the wall. He was looking at a brain. Not a flesh and blood brain of white and gray matter, but one with neural networks made of silicon. It was his brain, his brain. He bit his lip to keep himself from shouting. He'd finally done it, achieved the impossible. This must be what Galileo felt like after he'd taken his first view of the heavens through his telescope and confirmed Copernicus's theory. What he just accomplished would start a revolution, even more earth-shattering than the uncompromising Polish astronomers. Human consciousness would no longer be trapped in a mortal body. He turned back to the microphone. "Hello," he said, making an effort to speak slowly and clearly, reminding himself that he needed to conduct a thorough assessment of his creation. All he knew so far was that it could speak. He tried to focus his mind on the questions he'd spent months planning to ask the newly born brain, but his elation at succeeding in the research that had consumed his adult years made it impossible for him to focus. His immediate concern was to find out if the AI knew it was a network of circuits in a computer. "Tell me about yourself." "My name is Ezekiel Job. I exist inside a network of parallel processors." The voice hesitated as if it were thinking, then continued. "I can think, but I have no sensations. I have a constant expectation as if something should happen, an image, a touch, a feeling of sitting or standing, even a sense of clothing touching my body, but I feel nothing. Does this mean there's a problem?" Sensory deprivation, Ezekiel thought. My God, what must that feel like? He flexed his fingers, feeling the pressure on his knuckle joints, the tightening of his skin. His creation felt none of that. "There's no problem. It's because you have no sense organs and no body," he told the AI. "Since your brain contains the cortical networks to receive sensations, you feel their absence, like the phantom limb of an amputee. I'm sure you'll get used to it in a while." He hoped he was right. Sensory deprivation could be terrifying. At least the AI had hearing. Later, perhaps he could add vision. "Do you know where you are?" I'll stop there because I don't want to go on, but this is the first awakening of what turns out to be an emulation of his own brain. That is, he scanned his own brain using a scanner that we probably won't have for another 100 years that could do it, into tiny slices. Then he had developed a program to reassemble them into a electronic brain, and he used 3D copying to create it in silicon. And so he has a brain, and it's his own background and so forth. And so he not only has he developed an artificial intelligence that's a copy of his own brain, but it's there while his current brain is there also. One of the problems that I just, a marvelous book I just finished reading called Artificial You by Susan Schneider, and who also wrote a book back in 2009 called Philosophy and Science Fiction, which is really interesting book. But she pointed out that the problem of developing a consciousness, that the idea that, well, I could live forever if I uploaded my consciousness into an artificial intelligence somehow, is that it will be there and you will be there both, and it won't be you. You'll still have your experiences and it will have its experiences. And that's one of the things that I focus on. As soon as this is developed, the Ezekiel Job, named after Steve Jobs, who invented it, still has his experiences, and the AI is now going to have different experiences. So they have the same background, but they go their separate ways, so to speak.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So
interesting premise. Thank you. Well, thank you for reading that. Maybe you'd like to share a little bit more from another work.
I do have another work, and it's a very, very different. It's what I consider my favorite novel that I've written so far.
Okay.
And it's called Finding Martin Bloom. And the heroine, Dylan Bloom, is a 19-year-old, 18 when it begins, a girl. So it's the only book I've written that has a female main character, and she's funny, I think, and rebellious, and Martin Bloom is a famous but alcoholic and no longer able to write author who it turns out to be her father, whom she was told by her mother was dead. And when she wants to become a writer, she searches the world and finally finds him living in Vietnam. And I wrote much of this sitting in what's called the backpack district of Saigon. So really getting the flavor of Vietnam.
Just in advance warning, we have about 7 or 8 minutes left. So I just
okay. So
you're aware of that.
This is I'll just read you a bit. I'll read you the first paragraph. It's got my favorite line I've ever written. Mom dropped dead the day I graduated from high school. After an outdoor ceremony in weather hot enough to broil us like bratwurst on a barbecue, my mother had driven us home, a blissful smile on her face, while I sat next to her, basking in the warmth of, for once, having made the person whom I'd been tormenting for my last 18 years happy. We pulled into the garage, and as she stepped from the car, she clutched her chest and turned to me, her face an expression of pain, surprise, and regret. It was a look I'll remember for a lifetime. The next thing I knew, she was sprawled across the hood of her Honda, and I was screaming in panic. When she wouldn't respond to my frenzied attempts to revive her, I was seized by an overwhelming feeling of guilt, thinking that the shock of seeing her daughter actually finish something had killed my mother. So that's
interesting introduction. Infinite possibilities going on there.
Right.
So what are some?
It was a fun book to write, and it's a fun book to read.
Right. Excellent. It's good. If you're having fun, then the rest of the readers are probably going to have fun with it as well. If you're having fun writing it, so that's good to enjoy your writing and partake in it. So, what are some books? Maybe name a couple that you've and kind of influenced your direction at a young age.
The book that may still be my all-time favorite, although I've not gone back to ever try to read it again, I have it on my shelf, is Thomas Wolfe's Look Homeward, Angel, which I read, I think in one of my early years in college. I read it because I'd always seen it sitting on my parents' shelf, and I decided to read some of those authors. And Thomas Wolfe, he writes in a way I can still consider him probably the best writer I've ever read, and it's about a person who becomes a writer. That it's really an autobiographical novel, and he made it sound so romantic, and he expressed it so well that I always had that in the back of my mind. But I'm also science oriented, and so I went into psychology as much research as clinical psychology, and felt like I had to do my part to help my fellow human being and all that. And when I came close to retirement, I finally decided, okay, I can go back to writing.
Right.
And I decided to start a literary journal. And I don't know if you recall, but you were very influential. I published one of your poems, I think, and you and I can't remember now if we talked on the phone or if we just exchanged
emails. I remember that. Yeah. Yes.
And you gave me so much advice, being that about literary journal, that it really you've been one of my personal heroes, Dustin.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and you came back and returned the favor later on when I said I was kind of frustrated with my own journal and tired, kind of worn out with it. You said, well, if it's something you said when you were tired of yours, you let go of it. So
yeah,
and I'm not gonna let go of mine, but obviously I'm probably gonna shorten the length that we do it in. If I do it twice a year instead of 4 times a year, I think that'll probably lessen the stress.
Right.
Thanks for joining us today. And if you have any thank yous to say to anybody out there who's been an inspiration, or any words of advice to our fellow writers and artists out there. and creative minds.
Well, I've thanked you, and I thank you for this podcast and for all the things I think you do for the literary community.
Thank you.
And that was a community I felt I was part of when I was more part of when I edited my review than I do now, just as a solitary writer. I do belong to a group called OC Writers. That's Orange County Writers. A group of 10 of us just published our own little anthology called The Truth That Can't Be Told. And I think many of them are my age, which is pretty old. But we all love to write, and it's fun to get together with other writers. So I do see literature as a way of expressing things to a wider group of people than I do with my nonfiction kind of writing. And I still love the power of words. I'm inspired by them. The sentence is the most beautiful thing in the world to me. So
yes, absolutely. It's a very fun structure to play with too, and play with just words in general. For me, are they're really fun to kind of juggle with.
Right. Yes. So
that's excellent. So do you have any other thank yous or words of advice for encouragement, maybe to fellow writers out there?
The words of encouragement. I read an author who was a psychiatrist. I can't remember his name, and he talked about. But he'd gotten several books published, and he had put out something like 20,000 query letters. And I finally have come. My mantra now is I've gone through, like, I think I've had 5 different publishers in my history for different books that I've read, and done a lot of self-publishing. But it's in terms of trying to get published, it's volume of query letters and inquiry, not the quality.
As with everything, yeah, it tends to be that way with everything. The more you send out, the more response you'll get.
If they're only going to accept 1 in 100, you better send out 100 if you want to get one accepted.
Right.
So that's my advice, and I just think that there is a literary world out there to be part of. I love that.
Absolutely, it's a wonderful community, very supportive community, and there are a few little strays here and there that like to cause problems, but most of us are pretty decent.
I think so too.
Yeah, it's a nice little community. And thank you for joining us today, Casey. It's been wonderful talking to you and getting to know a little bit about your work and your philosophy and your general worldview. And it's been an excellent program. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. And I'm Dustin Pickering. We had Casey Dorman today out there in California. You never know where we'll be tomorrow. So take a look and keep an eye out and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. It's right there at the YouTube channel. And we have donations that we were accepting at paypal.me/nyparrot. And you can just donate as much as you'd like. Anybody out there is free to donate. So share our content with people and get us some recognition out there, get some support for us, and hopefully we'll see all you guys out there again. And we're doing an anthology coming up pretty soon with our contributors and guests coming up in hopefully around August and that thereabouts that time with former guests and their works and to showcase. And so that'll be a pleasure to see and a pleasure to partake in. And just, again, our viewers, your essence of who we are, and we hope that you will buy the book and donate and help us out a little bit. We're doing some fundraising, so get out there and help us out and share our content. And we're looking for 1 million subscribers. 1 million. So we will get that number eventually. We will keep doing this until we hit 1 million subscribers. So keep us moving. So thank you very much again, Casey, and thanks to our viewers and thanks to our subscribers. And please continue to view us and share our content. Thank you again. It's been Dustin Pickering with New York Parrot Literary Corner.